Good afternoon. Everybody having a nice day? Everybody happy? Yeah. Excellent. Okay, everybody got over the League Cup final, Carabao Cup? Yeah, excellent, excellent. Okay, well, exciting times ahead. We're now coming on to our third session. And when we started putting this event together, one of the things that was a sort of like bottom line for me was that we would have those journalists, those writers who do this thing every day. They have to cover the club. You know, some of them have been doing it for years, some of them are still coming to it. Other people in the world of social media and blogging and everything else, they are the sort of stalwarts who you know and love from the newspapers and many other things besides. It's a real, you know, hard graft, but they seem to love it. We've got some great speakers for you today. We've obviously got Amy Lawrence, we've got John Cross, we've got Sam Dean, and we're chairing them, of course, Tom Watts, National Treasure, I think B team of the National Treasure status by now. He's obviously been a football writer and a book writer and an actor and so forth, and you know him well. So please welcome to the stage our next panel.
Good afternoon, welcome. Mike's working all right? He looked at my turtleneck, he said, "Why are you wearing that?" Don't wear that, but I did anyway. Obviously, we all read about football. We all read about our club insatiably, day after day. Plenty of us actually, hour after hour, minute by minute, which perhaps tells its own story about where media coverage of the game has gone. People have talked for years about newspapers having being at the end of the line, social media, and you know the internet, everything. It's just, but you know, newspapers and football still count, and that relationship still counts. I would argue that it's arguably even more important than it ever was. I'm delighted that we've got such a great panel this afternoon. Three people who've come to football and to Arsenal in particular as journalists in very different routes, writing for very different kinds of publication, and would ask you to welcome again Amy Lawrence from The Athletic, Sam Dean, football reporter for the Daily Telegraph, and Lord Cross of Islington, formerly the Gazette, John Cross, chief football writer for the Mirror. Guys, just to start, because you know, you think, oh, people writing about football, so they probably learn how to write about football and then they go and get a job writing about football. You know, it doesn't really kind of happen quite like that. Well, it did with you, Sam, but we'll get on to that. But it's, you know, the three of you have come very different routes to where you are now. You've all ended up in the same place, writing about Arsenal on a daily basis or near daily basis. But I just thought it'd be interesting, just if you start, John, just how you came to be, you know, try and keep it within the hour if possible.
Yeah. I was going to ask, actually, how long have we got, really? But look...
You've got about 2 minutes, mate.
I'm an absolute football obsessive, always have been, always will be, and basically was, you know, stood on the North Bank for years, and my dad sort of was born and brought up in Blackstock Road, and then basically the best thing I could ever imagine was being a footballer when I was clearly nowhere near good enough. The next best thing was about writing about it, and then I was lucky enough to kind of get a kind of a block release, which was effectively an apprenticeship on the Islington Gazette, kind of my local paper and the local paper, and then began writing about Arsenal from there. You'll never believe this, but I met Tom, I think it was the late 80s, and you were putting together the book about the end. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. And then basically it was the final days of the North Bank, and we've been mates ever since. And it was wonderful, really. And then I did Arsenal programme notes and Arsenal programme, and then went away and was a bit of a traitor. And then basically I've been on the Mirror now 27 years for a fair chunk of that, doing Arsenal day in, day out. I'm chief football writer now, so don't do it so much. But that pathway was a dream for me, and to be writing about football and Arsenal day in, day out has been an absolute joy. And basically, there's no set route, I don't think, into journalism. But I think the one thing that you absolutely have to have is a passion and a desire and a real love of the game and the sport. And then I think if you cover Arsenal, you can see what a special place it is and special club it is.
I'm going to jump you, Sam. Give me a minute. I'll be right back. Aims completely, well, I say completely different, but it is different. You know, you came out of a bit like you and I were writing for fanzines absolutely at the same time, maybe even crossed at The Observer for a little while. But so what was your route into writing about Arsenal being what you did, and how has that kind of changed more recently since joining The Athletic?
OK, I'll try and keep this brief, which is tough. But a bit like John, I realised fairly quickly I wasn't going to be a footballer. This being the 1970s, 80s when I got the bug. And girls weren't really allowed to play football. So I know you've just had a talk here with, the great Arsenal women's team. But I remember getting detention at school because I kicked the netball around, and that was absolutely forbidden. So things have changed a bit. But I had this passion for football. I was the weird girl who loved football when I was growing up.
Some things never change, eh?
Absolutely. And, it was my passion. And I found my place there, found my energy, I found my inspiration. And I used to buy The Gooner, which was a fanzine. And funnily enough, when I look at today's sort of football consumption and content world, and you see blogs and vlogs and TikTok and all this homespun stuff people are making in their front room watch-alongs, and all the stuff that's going on where, what qualifications do you need? None. If you have the passion, you want to share your stuff about your club, do it. And that's what we got from fanzines. We obviously had no internet, no social media, so it was a very different avenue. But fanzines were basically little magazines about the size of a programme.
Well, the Gooner's still going.
Yeah, and they were made by fans for fans and pretty much printed off someone's photocopier at work in the old days and stapled together and sold for 50p or whatever. And they used to have a thing every issue saying, anyone who wants to write anything, just send it in. This is by the fans for the fans. And it took me months to pluck up the courage because I didn't see any female names in there at all. And I thought, oh, God. And I loved writing. And a bit like Ian Wright's Mr. Pigden moment, I had an English teacher at school and she changed my life. So I loved writing and I loved football. And I thought one of the days, I'll have a go. So I took really one of the worst games I can remember and thought, if I write about this, no one else will want to. And Arsenal lost the League Cup game on the plastic pitch at Oldham. And so I duly wrote something. And when I went to buy the next edition of The Gooner, there it was. I was like, oh, my God. Anyway, passion, to me, helps you to get on in life. If you really believe, if you really want to do something and you love it and you can transmit that. And I feel a bit like I just got on, a snowball thing started happening.
Yeah.
It didn't happen on purpose. I was doing The Gooner. It was great. I did bits and bobs for some other, for Shoot magazine. That, it was a little extra thing to be published. And before I knew it, a magazine called 442 was starting and they were advertising, and I applied with a ridiculous letter that didn't make any sense at all, but was basically like, I love football and it just makes me mad, was essentially what I was saying in some slight odd language. And for some reason, they gave me a chance. And that was, I learnt everything on the job. Oh, joy, how lucky. I learnt how to be a journalist, not by going to journalism college or any education like that, just by doing it. Probably a bit like you on the Gazette. And after 18 months of that, I was blessed that I was given a chance on national newspaper, The Observer, and went on from there, had an amazing, best part of 20 years covering all sorts of football with not, having to be a bit kind of keep my Arsenal hat under the table. And then when I joined The Athletic, they said, get that Arsenal hat on and wear it with pride. If you're an Arsenal reporter on the Arsenal beat, you want people to know that you care. So I'm lucky enough to do that now.
Right, brilliant.
Sorry, that's probably too long.
No. Sam, It's a different. You see what I mean? There's so many different ways, and yours is a different way altogether.
Yeah, well, Amy's story is far more romantic than mine. I very much wanted my whole life to be a football reporter, and sort of Googled how to do it, and that was do a degree.
What did it say? Did AI give you this is what I'd love to know.
I did a degree in history, and then I did a master's in journalism, and I just sort of pursued every possible freelance opportunity I could find, and eventually got onto the Telegraph graduate scheme, and always tried to manoeuvre my way towards football and towards sport. But I was trained as sort of a journalist for news and features and business and other things too, but was always very clear that football was my calling in my mind. And then in 2018, essentially an opportunity opened up to cover Arsenal. And I knew at the time that Arsenal was obviously a big club and it mattered to a lot of people, but I think within about 3 weeks of taking that role up, I'd realised the sort of emotional intensity, in a good way, of like the Arsenal community, and I found myself completely immersed in it. And now 8 years later, I pretty much live and breathe all things Arsenal, and that's my life now in many ways, along with an 8-month-old baby. So it's that and Arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little beforehand, and you called it like an Arsenal bubble that you've kind of stepped into. And would that be right, that you kind of live in this Arsenal bubble? Would you feel that way about it, Amy? That it's
I mean, I've sort of always lived in an Arsenal bubble, so I'm probably not the best judge. And when I wasn't covering Arsenal, I would, take myself out of it and do my job and try and be professional, and then go back in the bubble in terms of in my mind and in my heart.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, I don't mean so much bubble as in thinking about Arsenal
what, like
every day,
99%
because
of the time?
everybody here does that, difference, none of us get paid for it. But what I mean is more the thing of having to produce content on a daily or weekly or whatever it is basis. You've got to kind of live. There's a bubble around reporting on Arsenal.
Well, what you can't do is get it wrong, because people really care about this. And most other forms of writing or journalism or media, people like it or don't like it, but they don't actually want to kill you if you say something that you don't like or have an opinion that is provocative. And if you make a mistake, even like you get a date wrong, or just something where you haven't quite sussed the nuances of what's going on with player X or Y, there's no forgiveness out there, in the current world. So I think there is that sense of making sure you know what's happening and all the little details all the time. But that's maybe harder for you, because I would do that anyway. But I definitely feel that the one thing I would say that is, again, much probably harder for you than it is for someone of John and my age, is that we grew up in a time where access to the manager, access to the coaching staff, access to the directors, access to players was much more natural and more commonplace. So there's nothing I loved more, particularly when Arsene first came, and you'd go and do a chat with him, not necessarily a press conference, but we used to do these smaller chats around the table where there'd be maybe 5 or 6 guys, and it would go on for half an hour, 40 minutes. And every single time I used to walk out there thinking, God, I've learned something today. I'm thinking about things I've never thought of before, because he's so clever and so good at expressing himself. And I felt like our privilege of our job was, how do we share that with you? We're lucky enough to sit in the room with Arsene, or we're lucky enough to sit and have a chat with Ian Wright or Thierry Henry or whoever it might be. How do we share with you how it is to sit next to that person and look in their eyes directly, like what they're like, what makes them tick? And sadly, that's dwindled to the point of almost non-existence now. And, you're kind of lucky if you get one question in a post-match press conference that lasts 6.5 minutes between all the journalists now. So it's much tougher to get those insights, get those details, get the real nitty-gritty that we as writers and journalists can try and turn into something to share with readers.
So why has that happened? Amy's absolutely right, but why has that happened? Is that clubs have wanted to take more control of the narrative, or is it?
Yeah, I think so. There's certainly a big element of that, I think, Sam, isn't there? And then basically, I remember when I was on the IG, as I lovingly still call it, really, I'd go to absolutely every single youth game that I could.
Yeah.
I'd go to every reserve game and just kind of hang around. I was fortunate actually in the George Graham era that basically, because I was doing the programme, it was literally, you know, I mean, sort of partly as well, basically it was literally the only journalist invited sort of to Colney. It was an amazing time, and you sort of kind of form relationships with people who were still there. You know, basically, today I still rock up and, you know, Lynn was there, basically, on the door. And it's just amazing. And sort of people are still there and they basically form these relationships. And I'll always remember George Armstrong, who was obviously club legend and reserve team manager, one of the nicest people that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting in football. Absolutely unbelievable. He was fabulous with younger players in the reserve team. And it almost felt like he was taking me under his wing as a young reporter in the way that he did with young players, because he was just so sensational. And I would go into, Pat Rice would keep me waiting. I mean, he'd take delight in keep me waiting, basically, before we'd have a chat about the game sort of thing for the Islington Gazette. And basically, that's just Pat. It was just Pat. You know, he wasn't really, but it's just, you know, he had preferences, whereas Geordie would come out into the marble halls and says, "Oh, come on in," and basically would literally put me in the coach's room. And I'll always remember the time, I think I can safely say it now and get away with it, but basically how Steve Rowley, who was, you know, legendary former chief scout, great bloke as well, basically came into the coach room having been sent out to watch John Hartson at Luton, basically. And, you know, and saying, yeah, I'm not sure about this guy. He's a big guy, but yeah, probably like, you know, and they're basically analysing him. And, I mean, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous how basically, I obviously never breathed and wrote a word about it, but I knew he was on the radar. It was well known at the time. But basically, that you know, it was just that trust, I guess. And then slowly, in the days of press officers, I mean, the former director of comms, Amanda Doherty, is one of my great pals these days and stuff. But it was just taking control, having a bit of control over what was written, definitely kind of stop that direct access a little bit, taking control. Do you think you've lost that directness of relationships and understanding? You know, Amy refers to that kind of those magical rooms, sort of kind of after press conferences, Arsenal would go into a little room at the training ground after every single press conference and have a chat. Yeah. And basically, you know, sometimes we'd just be chatting, sometimes we'd sort of kind of, you know, do a little bit more on the record, sometimes it would be great. And it would form this amazing relationship and understanding. Yeah. And I just think in this age of, you know, the club wanting to control, every minute it feels like is precious and commercial, by the way, and everything is saleable and an asset. I think we've lost that understanding. I mean, I remember back in the day when you'd get a sort of good player interview and be guaranteed at least a couple of sit-downs a season at Arsenal, Arteta would always perennially be put up to me, basically, in about February, March, when Arsenal would doing their usual annual, blowing it, sort of in the chase for top four. And Arteta would sit there and go, "We're going to make it. I promise you we're going to make it." And basically, you would leave that room thinking, "We're going to make it." Because basically he was completely convincing. And he's a magical talker, and that's what I like best about him as a manager. Basically, he would convince anyone about anything, frankly. He's got that magic. But then basically, it's so interesting to see him then go to Man City for a bit after playing his days and then come back. And I thought, this guy's going to be so good in press conferences and kind of, you're going to have that personal closeness relationship. Definitely keeps you at arm's length. I mean, he definitely knows who we are, but basically, you know, but he would sometimes play up for the cameras and sort of kind of show a little bit of humour and light. But he's quite serious, isn't he? And I think he's kind of, you know, he sort of kind of is part of that new attitude, I think, to the press, which coupled with the club attitude.
Yeah,
to the
so
press.
because absolutely, and you know, listening to a couple of old timers talking about the good old days. But so if we take as a given, and it's absolutely, it is a given, that kind of access and the possibility of those kind of relationships has gone. You're the Arsenal man at the Telegraph. You know, you've got to be writing about something. So if you haven't got that ease of access, how do you go and find, one, stuff that enables you to provide copy day after day, and two, perhaps find something that isn't what everybody else is writing about? Well, how do you do it, Sam?
Well, that is the eternal challenge, really.
I know it's the challenge. That's why I'm asking you how you do it.
Fundamentally, it's relationships with people around the players now, more than I think directly with the players themselves.
Right.
Whether that's agents or commercial people or PR people or whatever, it's building that network of trust and having people you know and can go to at the right time or whenever they want to speak to you or vice versa. And also it's having, in my world, I think, because at the Telegraph we have a paywall online now, so you have to subscribe to read anything. And our sort of mantra is you have to give people something worth paying for, which has to be different. If they can get it for free on the BBC or the Mirror or the Guardian, why would they pay to read it on Telegraph? So there's a kind of demand to be original and unique, and that comes down to sort of idea generation and trying to spot things. And also one of the great things about covering Arsenal is that because there's such an engaged fan base and people are so interested in so many different levels and details, that sometimes you can get a full 1,000-word article out of a tiny thing you've spotted, and people love it because they go, oh, I saw that too, or I want to know more about that. Or it might just be like something you've seen in the training ground or a stat you found or something on the pitch that no one else has really flagged. And you can really drill down into that detail. And because the fan base is so engaged and interested, people like that stuff. And I look at some of the sort of best performing articles I've done and the things that people have enjoyed the most have been really sort of niche things that you wouldn't have really thought that would be the case, but people love it. And I think that says a lot about Arsenal as a club and the sort of support for them.
Sam is too modest to say, but he's excellent at nurturing contacts and speaking to people that make relevant, salient points that give you an insight. I think sometimes the best pieces I read, you know, quite apart from the kind of great transfer exclusives or whatever, you know, that basically, which I love, getting stories is always the hardest sort of issue, but good at that as well. But then basically, it's about the anecdotal stuff. It's about the little insights, about the little nuggets that's said in the dressing room. You know, and sometimes, you know what, it comes from the quirkiest, weirdest place. But then basically, it might come from an agent. But I tell you what, 9 times out of 10, it's not from the agent that basically looks after the player involved. It's about the bit of gossip that he's said to that other agent. And people just sometimes see on social media and say, you've read that so wrong. You know, because an agent's not going to ring you and basically say, oh, just add this. And basically, you know, but if you speak to enough people and make enough calls and connect enough people, then the jungle drums and the village that is football still, basically word gets round. And that's 9 times out of 10, sometimes it's someone not directly involved when you do, you know, something quirky, but it's often about kind of the little anecdotal stuff, which, you know, which always piques my interest in, and he's very good at that.
A random example, it's completely random, but somebody not at all connected to David Raya said to me when he joined, he's got really big hands. I thought, what? David Raya's got massive hands. And sort of from that, it led to a full thing where we had David Raya posing for our newspaper doing this and showing the size of his hands, and you have to make special goalie gloves that are big enough for his specific hands. It's that kind of thing. People love that stuff.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And obviously, you mentioned transfer stories in the news, and that's always the fundamental for the journalist. But sometimes that kind of thing too is people love to read it.
I only laugh because I think it's a belter. I think it's an absolute goalkeeper has big hand shock. And it's just brilliant, isn't it? You know, absolutely, I know, but it's a belter. I just love it. It's colour, it's what you want. It's entertaining, it makes us laugh. And I think sometimes the colour and the inside scenes behind it is brilliant. It's the best.
Yeah. Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just, thinking about when you were writing for the Observer, it's quite clear you had you were able to source some really good stories, break some really good stories. There were people, that was one kind of thing. But since you've gone, and I'm fascinated by it, and I think it's brilliant, I think you do it brilliantly, is that increasingly, now you're writing for The Athletic, you know, you're finding your way of connecting with a fan base, with a readership, and that what you've done is you've gone, okay, I'm not going to worry so much about stories. No. What I'm going to worry about, and what you do, at The Athletic, and it's maybe something new in newspapers, is you try and give a voice to what you think the other 59,999 people in the ground were thinking at any given time on a particular afternoon. Do you know what I mean? That's your way of going, well, rather than us all writing the same stuff, you know, whether it's Sam finding out that David Raya's got big hands. It was a different kind of conversation 20 or 30 years ago. But your way of finding something different is you've got a platform now, and obviously The Athletic value it, and I know for a fact that the readership value it, is that I'll do, actually, kind of goes back to writing for fanzines. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of, I'm gonna speak for, I'm one of you, and so I'm gonna speak for you. And this is how I felt. Did you feel like that?
I think that's one of the lovely things of getting a little bit older and having the confidence to feel that you don't have to do what you're told quite so much, or what's expected. I'm terrible at news stories. The transfer stuff, it's all yours. You know, I run away and hide, hope they never call me when all that's going on. I can't be doing with all that. I don't know all the agents. I don't spend my time. I'm a completely different type of writer. I'd say these guys are really brilliant journalists. I'm not a very good journalist. I'm just a writer. I just like writing. I'm not that interested in the hard-nosed stuff. But what I do love is trying to capture the emotion of why we watch football and why we all care about it. And I remember when I was I was very lucky enough to work on the production of a film about '89, which, as most of you will know, is the greatest day in Arsenal Football Club's history, possibly. And the director that I worked with, his big thing, and it's stuck in my mind ever since, it's make people care. You know, what's the point of reading something or watching something if you don't really care about it? If it gets under your skin and into your soul, you know, why does it matter? And for me, the privilege of being in a stadium, like now, obviously it's amazing because pretty much wherever you are in the world, most people can watch matches live. And that's a phenomenon of the way that the world has changed.
Well, and specifically can watch
20
Arsenal
years.
matches live.
Yeah.
Every Arsenal match
The
live.
fan base is absolutely global. And I love watching clips of people all over the world gathering together, wherever they are, in Africa or in America or in the Far East, and watching the game and living it like fans together in real time. It's amazing. And when we started out, and you used to write a match report, which I love doing, people didn't used to have necessarily seen the game. They weren't all on the telly. In fact, they were hardly on the telly. So you'd need to read a report to actually know what happened. And yes, you can quite dryly say, well, so-and-so crossed the ball to so-and-so, who laid it off to so-and-so, which is fine. It's a description, but bring it to life, you know? Make people who are reading that feel like they're in that stadium with you, watching that same thing happen, and everybody's gasping. And that's kind of what I love doing, is bringing a bit of the emotional meaning to this sport that has captured all of our hearts, and this club that everybody thinks about morning, noon and night.
John, there's more, almost on a weekly basis, there's more, that word, sorry, apologise for using it, but there's more content connected to football generated, you know, from day to day than there ever has been. And if you even go back a year, you'd go, oh, wow, there's so much more. So you're writing or getting other people to write a very particular story for a readership. You know, this little... It being everywhere, does that make your job more or less difficult? That every other bugger's writing or broadcasting, or do you know what I mean? I've heard it said that the coverage of football, the contemporary coverage of football, is a mile wide and an inch deep. Okay, that there's this kind of it's everywhere. Does that make your job easier because everybody's talking and thinking about football and specifically thinking about Arsenal all the time, or does it make it more difficult because you're trying to be heard amidst all this? And, you know, increasingly, a lot of it AI generated, by the way.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
You know, is it easier, harder? How do you...
No, I think the one thing is that I think you probably have to make sure you stand out from the crowd. I do think the one thing that's sort of almost guaranteed to kind of get, you know, sort of views and hits is injury and team news as much as a transfer. But I think then that basically, I think there's so much going on that you know, if you're talking about a win, a controversy, I think I agree with Amy absolutely that basically match reports have almost evolved as well. I mean, it's quite interesting at the moment. We're sort of kind of as a paper, as a product, basically, we've undergone sort of changes with the way that we're printed, and we're kind of in this strange space between two where I'm almost back to running copy, which if people don't know, you kind of file a chunk at a certain period of the game and the game's not finished. And yeah, it's a real challenge, let me tell you. It's a challenge that I'd kind of forgotten, really, because I'd got into the habit for years and years of filing on the whistle, which is a lot easier. It's still a task, but it's a lot easier than running copy to make running copy interesting. So you're not kind of X passes to Y for 550 words or whatever it is, and then kind of about 6 piles on top. It's just not, in this modern day, no one, I think, it's evolved, and basically people are not going to read that. You basically got to take it so it's fresh for the morning. If it's a night match, it's something different, it's some insight. But I think much more than that, you want to provide that insight, you want to provide that bit of colour. I think you want to provide something that people haven't seen, a little bit of knowledge, an anecdote or something, you know, just, yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a recent example, but I mean, just, and write with passion and, you know, and sort of kind of love for it, I think. And people do engage in that and kind of, you know, feel that and sort of kind of take that on, I think. So I think that's really important. And you can, I understand what you're saying, there's a hell of a lot of noise and voices out there. And then basically, you can, I think, stand out by being a bit more passionate, a bit more insightful, and news stories will do their own thing and be their own, have their own place. But I think sometimes an insight or a particular read on something is, you can still make a difference and still be heard. Both of these guys are absolutely fantastic at it, and basically will make a difference and stand out above the crowd, I think, because they're quality and they provide insight and they provide something from their knowledge and insight and nous that others might not necessarily seen. So yes, there's a lot of noise out there, but I still think quality and cream rise to the top. I really do.
I'm going to come to you, Amy, in just a moment on that. But yeah, go on, Sam.
I was going to say, my view on it is that everyone in here or watching the game or from across the world now knows what happened. So our job as journalists isn't really to say, this is what happened. And everyone also has an opinion, and they can put that on YouTube or Twitter or wherever they want to put it. And so my job not necessarily isn't just to say what I think happened either. For me, I look at it, and I think I'm sure for Amy and John as well, it's why it happened and how it happened, and anything you can add that expands it and takes it beyond what people have seen. Like, is there something they've done in training that leads to Odegaard scoring that goal? Or is there something they've done behind the scenes? Or why did they get Havertz to score that goal, play that position, that kind of thing? I think if you can add that value as a journalist using the privilege you've got with the access and the relationships, then that is sort of the ultimate goal, really, to take it beyond this is what happened, it's this is why it happened and kind of how.
Can I ask you lot something, our lovely audience? I'm assuming you've all got an interest in writing because you're here at a sports writing event for the British Library, but how many of you, could you just raise your hands if after a game you will read something either online or in a paper or whatever because you want to read about the game? Yeah. That's quite a lot. Now, can I ask how many of you would listen to a podcast? And third one is how many of you would be watching YouTube or something online or TikTok or something like that? Okay, so my entirely unscientific questioning, I'd say there's probably, in order of preference, a fairly close tie, but maybe just a shade of reading, then podcasts, and then watching stuff is next. Thank you very much. That's really interesting.
Now, I've got another one. So how many people would rather do anything than, would rather do anything at all, rather than read about the Arsenal or listen to a podcast about the Arsenal or watch something on YouTube after Arsenal have lost? How many? Yeah, I thought so. I know. You can't, can you?
No.
You just go, other things just become massively more interesting. Yeah, football.
think
No, I'm
sometimes
not
you
really
need to
big on
process.
football, actually. Have you seen what's on telly tonight? Yeah,
Some people look
I
at...
think you need it to process sometimes.
Yeah.
I think listening to a really good podcast or reading something good just helps me come to terms with it sometimes. Not always, but sometimes.
well, you're a standout because you've seen my straw poll. It's down even way below YouTube.
But some people think, oh, Arsenal journalists, they want the team to lose, there's an agenda, all this stuff. For us, the best thing that could happen for my career is Arsenal win everything.
Yeah, because
That'd
more
be
people
brilliant.
want to read about it.
More people want to read that. That proves the point. People want to read about it. It'll be on the front of the newspaper. It'll be everywhere. It'll be great. We all, obviously, we're not cheerleaders because that's not our job, but we want them to do well. I think is a fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Collectively,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
better for us as journalists.
I feel a bit recently, I think that sometimes I've been cast as a bit of a villain of the piece, really being a little bit negative, but I think sometimes I do think Arsenal winning the title this season after 22 years would be the most marvellous, fantastic story. And it would be an absolute joy to cover it, I've got to say.
Well, present company, perhaps. I've got to tell you about the rest of the country, mate, because they don't really, don't really see it that way.
No, it's interesting this, because I had this debate recently, and again, straw poll, but I am absolutely adamant that basically, and this cropped up in one of your columns, didn't it, with Jamie Carragher, cue the booing here, but basically, I actually agreed with a large part of what Jamie said, in that basically I'm absolutely adamant that so we're talking 22-23, I think, and honestly, we're in the Arsenal bubble in this room, we absolutely are, but if you take a step outside, as I do, basically, I think that the neutrals in the country really wanted Arsenal to win. It was a breath of fresh air, something completely different, and by the way, they were playing good football. 23-24, I still think the neutral wanted Arsenal to win. You're up against Man City, and then last season, I don't think Arsenal ever truly challenged. Liverpool just had it. They had it in the bag. And then basically, I think this season, for reasons I can't quite understand, because if you're good at set pieces, why wouldn't you use set pieces? Let's not beat around the bush here, and that's what happens. And personally, I feel I'm not completely convinced on a couple of summer signings, I have to say. Anyway, but basically, so kind of, I can see that Arsenal are not massively attractive at times, but they have been brilliant against Bayern Munich, Atletico Madrid, and Inter Milan. But I do feel as if it's evolved in that basically I'm not sure that the neutrals do still want Arsenal to win this season, which I feel is a shame. I think it really is, because I think it's great to have a different name as the champions. I think Arsenal would be a good story 22 years on. And I just think, they probably, I think, release the shackles a bit, be a bit more relaxed, and maybe next season, is Jam tomorrow, I know, but basically you'd be a bit more expansive in the football. But it's a really strange dynamic, and I think looking at it is odd. I mean, I always, basically learned many lessons from Henry Winter, who's on earlier. Henry's brilliant at, always listening to the fans and having sort of a good barometer. I like looking on social media, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. I'm lucky enough to always sit on the same seat in the press box at Arsenal. There's a group of guys who's sort of opposite, who are absolutely fantastic. They're a great sounding board. We have such a laugh. And basically, they're brilliant. And the way they support Gorkarez through thick and thin, by the way, deserves massive credit and respect. And it's a lesson to me as well. And it's really interesting to take that barometer, but also I can't quite understand why the negative thing comes around.
Yeah, this is bothering you, Joe. I can tell this is bothering you because I
is.
didn't even ask you about it.
No, I know, but I can't get my head around it. I can't get my head around it.
You don't have to be liked. All you got to do is win, apparently.
Well, I just think, there was even something with Paul Merson last week, and Merson was saying that basically, Arsenal might only end up with the title. They've obviously been chasing 4, they're now chasing 3. Well, who cares? Who absolutely cares? I mean, if they win the title, it would be the most remarkable thing and be an incredible achievement from Mikel Arteta and be fantastic. Who would care less?
Just show of hands again. How many of you lot care about
She was
what the
born to be a
neutrals
school
think?
teacher, really. Go on, what was that again?
How many of you care about what the neutrals think? I mean, exactly.
Oh, you say that, but you do. You do.
No, I don't think you do.
No, I do.
Arsenal's job this season is not to please the neutrals. Arsenal's job this season is to do something.
But I would say it's nice to be respected. I know, nice to be respected.
You can't make people respect you. You can't make people like you in life, in any walk of life. And you've got to stand confident in who you are and what you're doing. And I also suspect that deep down, quite a lot of non-Arsenal people actually respect what Arsenal will do this season if they get over the line. They might not want to come out and congratulate or say they're pleased about it, because I think a lot of what's going on is that we're just living in this extremely radical, weird, contemporary social media age where everyone wants to be negative first. People don't think positive first. You can walk down the street and you can see a stranger and they're more likely to go than they are to give you a smile. It's changed. Life has changed. And you extrapolate that on social media. You look at the fact that we're talking about commercialising opinions, which, you mentioned already. There are fans of any club, every club and any club, and our AFTV kind of started it, but it's now everywhere, where people are getting money because they have got angry opinions that people like to watch. And, I'm not sure how much substance any of that's got. And I certainly don't think Mikel Arteta and the players give a hoot. What they care about is what they're doing for themselves and for the people who support them, and that's it.
I think people outside of Arsenal have become quite comfortable with the idea of Man City winning. Partly because it's happened a lot, and partly because you can kind of say...
It's asterisk.
It's asterisk. You can make your peace with that and be like, well, they bought all that money and they spent all those... and you can kind of handle that if you're not an Arsenal or City fan. But I think Arsenal, the way they've rebuilt, the way they've built up, the way they've used academy players, the way they've done all these things, the way they've energised the Emirates Stadium, a lot of fans at other clubs look at that jealously and think, I wish we could have done that. I wish we could enjoy the way that Arsenal fans enjoy
Some
going
clubs
to
from not too far away.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons that a lot of neutrals sort of snigger and sort of snipe at Arsenal is because of it shines a light on their own club's failings, whereas City winning, it doesn't, because it's City like a different beast, it's like a different planet, because the way people see them. So I think that kind of partly explains it. Personally.
Yeah. Look, sorry, I'm springing this on you. I do want to have time to take one or two questions from the floor, but I just want to ask you, you've had longer or shorter times around football journalism and writing about football and reading about football, and I just would like each of you to give me, as a way of kind of summing up where you sit in relation to the job of writing about football, would you be able to give me one, if you wanted to take one story that goes, I love that. Now, it might be a story as in the breaking of a piece of information, or it might be an opinion piece, or it might be an interview. It might be something that you were responsible for. It might be something that someone else was responsible for. But something that kind of sums up. Is there one example of what you go, that if you do that, you've nailed it? Have you got one example?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind just on the hoof is I was blessed a couple of years ago or so to interview Zidane, and Zidane is my icon. I absolutely adored him as a player. and followed his career very closely because I covered France for pretty much his entire international career. And went to do this interview, and it was an interview day where he was doing lots of little sections for different people. There was a radio section, there was some French media, there was some foreign media, there was some podcast, there was all sorts of various things going on, and I had 12 and a half minutes with Zidane. And I spent about a week thinking to myself beforehand, what can I ask him that no one else is going to ask that actually makes him get out of robot mode? Because when you're on one of those days and you're being interviewed by endless different people, you just, you talk about the same old stuff. And I was very conscious during the day of watching him just going through the motions, being asked about scoring in the World Cup final, being asked about headbutting in the World Cup final. Basically that, mostly. But because I had this detailed, slightly obsessive Zidane thing going on, I had a particular thing in mind that I wanted to ask him about. And I did, and he was like this. And we had the most amazing 12 and a half minutes.
My 12 and a half minutes with Zizou.
And somehow I spun it into hopefully seeming like I'd spoken to him for a bit longer. But we had such a great conversation. I was so proud of being able to maybe allow him to enjoy it a bit and think outside the box. That was probably my favourite thing.
Okay.
One of my favourite things.
Yeah. That's great, though, that being able to kind of... I've got an example of that. Go on. Can you think of one, Sam?
Well, I was going to see your Zidane and raise you with Reece Nelson. It's not so much a journalistic sort of achievement, but that Bournemouth game, when he scored the winning goal in 2023, I remember thinking at the time, like, what an absolute privilege it is to be paid to be sitting here. And the outpouring of
it's amazing,
joy,
wasn't it?
It was like a religious experience, that. And there are people in tears next to the press box, I'm sure you saw that kid on the pitch high-fiving Arteta. It was just like the most... And obviously it didn't work out for us all that season, but in that moment, it felt like sort of the gods of football were sort of smiling upon this club, and this whole stadium was taking off, and it was springtime, and it just felt like... I remember leaving that day being like, this is a cool job. This is a cool job, I can do this. And I think about that as like... I mean, journalistically, you try and write a match report that tries to capture some of that, and I'm sure I failed miserably, but just being there for that and experiencing it was like, this is what football's all about, and this is the joy it brings to people. So, yeah, Reece Nelson.
Brilliant. No, it was an amazing moment.
I'll always remember walking home during that season, actually. I think it might have been after a midweek game, maybe against Everton. And I was kind of walking sort of behind two fans who were chatting away on their way to Arsenal tube station, and basically they were going, if we win it this year, I'll never want for anything ever again. Yeah. And it was like, I've always remembered and cherished that moment simply because it was so out of the blue, wasn't it? And it was such a fairy tale, and no one saw that coming. I thought it was the most brilliant thing. Anyway, my proudest bit, I've got to say, very self-indulgent, forgive me, is basically I did a book on Arsene Wenger, and when it dropped through on the doormat, and basically the first day before publication, it's the proudest day of my life, and then basically it was wonderful, and I've been very lucky to write across different things and do things, but actually to write a book on that, then that gets translated into 16 different languages, or however many it is, and then basically, Wenger, did say, I've made you rich by you killing me. I promise you didn't make me that rich. I promise you. But it was just a joy to do that, and I was able to kind of do in the foreword just a tribute to my dad, who basically had passed away not before. But all we ever spoke about was Arsenal and football, because we love it, absolutely love it. And then basically it was just, and I always remember going to the 2014 FA Cup final and looking at that game 2-0 down. I'm thinking, can't you just for once, and because and sure enough they did it, and I just felt he was with me, and it was just the most amazing thing, and all things are linked, and I just loved it. It was brilliant, beautiful. Yeah, that's what football is, isn't it?
No, absolutely, and it's funny that you mentioned Wenger and that kind of that breaking through thing. It wasn't for journalism. It was actually for a TV interview, but I wish I'd written it, to be honest. Went to see Wenger about was doing a TV documentary and I wanted to talk to him about Stade de Reims. Suggested it to Arsenal and the answer came back, yeah, be at the training ground such and such time. Little did I know, and I don't know, it escapes me whether you mention it in your book about him, but Stade de Reims were effectively the French national team. In the late 50s, early 60s, got to 3 of the first 5 European Cup finals, didn't win any of them, but Just Fontaine, all these, used to play their biggest games actually in Paris because so many people won. Anyway, it turns out, and he said to me, everything that I believe in football is because of that team. He watched that team when he was a kid. He said everything they did, the phrase champagne football came from Stade de Reims. But the thing was, suddenly, this is where the breaking through thing goes, where you've gone to interview a football manager, and he's come in the room. I'm not being funny. He's come in the room, and you know what we do? If, like, you say to me, oh, what about the Arsenal double team in '71? And you start reading off all the names, or, the Invincibles. He's come in the room, before I've even got a mic on him, he's naming the teams from the European Cup finals from Stade de Reims. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly you go, oh, yeah. Yeah, you are this football manager, but you're just a football fan, aren't you? You're just mad for football like all of us are. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. But that's by the by. So, questions from the floor. We've got, yes.
It was this idea that, your relationship with the managers changed. As a fan, back in the 60s, I would knock on players' doors and get autographs. And I would say that 96, the European Championships 96, is where it changes. And I know that Roy Keane talks about the prawn sandwich brigade, but the gentrification and the money, I think, really start after that. And I think that's what, I'd be interested in your opinion, whether you think I'm right, that is what has really changed. And one little vignette from last awful Sunday, if you actually watched, not what was on the pitch at the start of the second half, which was terrible, but if you looked in the crowd, the number of empty seats well into the second half. And I think that this is a real problem. It's the gentrification, it's the money that has actually taken the game away from a lot of us. That's my feeling. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's clearly been a huge radical change. I would probably date it slightly earlier. I think the Hillsborough disaster, Italia 90, that was really, for me, when things shifted. And we moved away from it being this working class game for the masses, where people weren't treated very well if they went to football, but nobody out there in the rest of the world cared anyway, to the beginnings of this. Then it's very soon afterwards, Sky Sports started, we had the rebrand, the Premier League, the money started coming in, the foreign players started coming in, the foreign managers then started coming in, and there was just this huge shift. And it's become increasingly about money, and we sit here today also trying to win the league, and, season tickets are obviously massively expensive. People go home 10 minutes early. They come when they want. It's coming to be entertained as if, you might go to, some other event that, people don't feel that same sense of there's music going on, blaring like all the, until 10 seconds before the game starts or till before the Angel. Then at the end of the game, you can't get a song out because they're banging out, whatever song they want everybody to sing. Half time, we've got the commentary of junior gunners taking penalties. Let people be fans a bit more. It's become very organised and formal and sanitised, and even, tifos and stuff, it's all organised for you. Here's your flag on your seat. I remember going to Anfield in '89 and going in my friend's garage, her dad's garage, and painting a sheet that we took up to Anfield. That sort of stuff has become, sanitised from the matchday experience.
If you miss it, it is available elsewhere.
Yeah,
it is available.
Yeah, but not at the top level of football because the Premier League. I think at Anfield they have a similar situation. At Old Trafford, it's just not an Arsenal-specific problem. No, this is a Premier League problem. I don't think it's very easy to rewind. And I also believe that the club are quite aware of quite a lot of it. Mikel actually has been really fixated with, from day one, how do we energise this lot? How do we make it hostile? How do we make everybody, create that sort of environment that makes it difficult for the other team and makes our players think that, you know, the army's behind them. And he says it a lot. He's trying constantly to engage everybody. Come on, get on this boat with us. But it's difficult because of the modern world that we live in. It's a global, expensive thing.
Yes. And then
I just want to ask, reply to you. It seems now like we're almost supporting a fashion
They're good at fashion.
company, where when Tim Stillman was talking about the old Arsenal shop run by Jack Kelsey, where there was one shirt, one scarf, one hat.
they had
A
different
few
sizes, to
pictures.
be fair.
That was it. They did have different sizes, but there was, and you might, if you were lucky, get a goalkeeper's shirt. I go to women's matches now more than, well, no, not more. I've still got a season ticket for both. But the women feel less like they're a vehicle for the club to sell more stuff. You go in the Arsenal shop and you think...
But if you go to Barcelona or Real Madrid or Juventus,
Yeah, or
it's the
anywhere
same
else
at
in the
every
Premier
major
League.
club.
They're models to sell the merchandise now.
I did a count on this, and they've released more than 50 different fashion collabs since the start of last season. So it's on average about 30 a season, which just feels extraordinary to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a question following on from this gentleman because he referenced Hillsborough. And I've always viewed Hillsborough as there, but for the grace of God, go the Arsenal fans. It could have happened to us. And my question to the panel here is, would you write for the Sun newspaper?
No. Anyone else can say what they want, but I wouldn't know.
I don't see that as a career move. But what I should say, look, I mean, it's not I'm not here to defend anyone or whatever. But like, there are lots of reporters we all know at the Sun who are very good journalists, and I'm sure they would hate to be sort of besmirched by what happened back then. But I understand, obviously, the question.
Yeah, there have been apologies made, and I do think that I know, but and I remember being on the North Bank that day very, very clearly when it happened. So no one needs to tell me about sort of the impact and the emotion and the heartbreak. But I do feel sometimes in you know, it's from a different era. People have apologised, and I do think I've got a lot of respect and time for a lot of colleagues who work on the paper and have worked in the paper in years gone by. It's not something that, I mean, funnily enough, it happened. You know, Merseyside has taken a very strong stance. I actually really massively admire and respect Liverpool as a fan base. I love going to Anfield, and because of that unique nature of the fan and the coverage, and it almost changed and came back again. I'm sure you'll know the reasons why, and is staunch and as strong as ever. But I do feel that actually, you know, I've got friends and colleagues, and you know, so I've got respect for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me. Well, it is for me to say because I'm going to say it. But I think you just want to mind how you go. The Sun is like that's a brand on a cereal packet. Don't get confused about saying the Sun this, the Sun that. Name names. Rupert Murdoch has done more damage to culture in this country, to the culture of this country, than anybody, any single person in my lifetime. And that covers some ground. You know, I lived through Thatcher, by the way. But Rupert Murdoch, and that was his paper. And he set the limits. He employed Kelvin Mackenzie. Do you know what I mean? So it's all very well saying I wouldn't work for the Sun. The Sun's now is a different thing.
But we're told with great respect, then you're sort of working in a building that is owned and then produces other titles and other you know, a radio station.
Yeah.
So
I think it's
you know,
more about
I just
what
named
we
the
learn.
bloke, that's all.
I think it's more about a particular, you know, title, isn't it? And then basically something there that's, you know, is as entrenched there as ever, really. But I do feel as if a lot of apologies have been made. But it wouldn't be for me to say people can move on, because it's not my place to do that, and not in a million years.
Good. Well, happy days. Happy days. Roll on Southampton next weekend. Hey, we'll get back to it. Stop talking about it and get back to it. Look, I'm sure you've enjoyed as much as I have the company of three. Yeah, it's great. There are certain words that are used in relation to journalists and football writers. Like doyen is one of them. Stalwart is another. Doyen, stalwarts, call them what you want. The very best of company. Please put your hands together and thank John Cross, Dan Dean, Amy Lawrence, ladies and gentlemen.
And Tom, what?